All right, ready to dive into something a little different?
Okay, I'm intrigued.
We're looking at a company prospectus, but not just any company.
I'm guessing not your typical tech startup, right?
It's for Anglian Water from 1989, right before they went public.
Anglian Water, like the water company.
The one and only.
That sounds a little dry, to be honest.
Maybe not the first thing that screams exciting deep dive.
Right.
But trust me, this prospectus is like a time capsule.
Okay, I'm listening.
It reveals how they pitch themselves to investors.
To get people to buy their stock, basically.
Exactly.
So what's so fascinating about a water company's finances?
Well, before privatization, Anglian Water wasn't some struggling company.
Really?
They were a public authority handling water and sewerage for eastern England.
Wow, that's a huge area.
Think about all those cities, towns, villages.
A mix of everything.
And get this, their region was one of the most prosperous in the UK at the time.
Huh, that's interesting.
High GDP, low unemployment.
You wouldn't necessarily think privatization target.
Right. It challenges the assumption that it's always a rescue mission.
More like the government saw a chance to cash in.
Exactly. So in '88, a year before going public, they restructured like crazy.
Getting ready for the big show.
Consolidated divisions, separated functions, very deliberate.
Setting the stage.
Part of it was to prepare for this new National Rivers Authority.
The NRA.
Yeah, they'd oversee water management, a whole new framework.
So very strategic moves.
Big time.
But let's get down to brass tacks. What did Anglian Water actually do?
Where did the money come from?
Right, the nitty-gritty.
Well, their main income source was unmetered water supply.
What we all use every day without thinking about it.
Exactly. That was the biggest chunk.
Interesting.
Then came sewage services.
Makes sense. It's all connected.
And then charges for trade effluent. Ever heard of that?
Trade effluent? Not really. Is that like industrial waste?
Basically, wastewater from businesses.
Oh, so they had to treat that too.
Yep, and charge for it.
So their income was tied to how much water people used.
More water use, more money for them.
Not much incentive to conserve, then.
Right, and speaking of challenges, they had a ton of aging infrastructure.
Oh, that's never good.
Especially those old iron pipes, you know what those do?
Rusty water, yeah.
Yep, not a good look.
Definitely not a selling point.
And then, where did all this water even come from?
Good question. A whole network, I imagine.
They had a mix. 52% from aquifers underground.
Okay, so over half from groundwater.
Then 45% from rivers stored in reservoirs.
And a tiny bit directly from rivers.
Just 3%.
Interesting breakdown.
They even highlighted the Rutland water system.
I know that one. It's massive.
Crucial for supplying fast-growing areas like Milton Keynes.
Keeping up with demand.
But they were already flagging challenges back then, like nitrate pollution.
So even back then, it wasn't a simple fix.
Definitely not a one-and-done situation.
So we've got the water sources. Now, what about the rules of the game?
Ah, the regulations.
The playing field.
Well, the prospectus mentions this new Water Act and water quality regulations.
Setting standards?
Yep, stricter standards for drinking water based on European directives.
So external pressure to up their game.
Exactly. Environmental awareness was growing.
Making an impact.
But here's the thing.
Uh-oh.
They weren't actually meeting all these standards yet.
That's surprising for a company going public.
Right. They had issues with nitrates, nitrites, iron, even pesticides.
Wow, a whole cocktail of stuff.
Not exactly what you want in your drinking water.
No, not ideal.
To make things even more complex, they had these Section 20 undertakings.
Sounds official.
Basically, agreements with the government to address these issues.
Like a grace period to get things fixed?
Right, they had some leeway.
And then there were relaxations too, right?
Yep, temporary exemptions from some standards.
So even more flexibility.
It was a balancing act, cleaner water, but recognizing that companies need time.
And don't forget, the NRA was brand new.
True, that added another layer of uncertainty.
How strictly would they enforce things?
Right, lots of questions hanging in the air.
Makes you wonder what it was like on the ground.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got aging infrastructure, pollution concerns, and a new sheriff in town.
Sounds expensive.
Let's talk money.
Time for the big reveal.
Exactly. How much are we talking?
Hold on to your hats because they had this massive plan.
Okay, lay it on me.
It was called the K Investment Program.
Catchy.
And get this, over the first 5 years after going private,
Yeah.
they were planning to spend, wait for it, £1.47 billion.
Billion with a B.
Billion with a B.
That's a serious chunk of change.
Serious commitment.
What were they going to do with all that cash?
Everything. Water resources, treatment, distribution, sewerage, the works.
Sounds comprehensive.
And some projects were scheduled to continue all the way to 2010.
Wow, long-term vision.
But they were also realistic. Things change. Unexpected costs pop up.
Always happens.
So they had this specific K adjustment built in.
A way to account for those curveballs.
Exactly, like a safety valve.
Smart move.
But they also admitted something else.
What's that?
There might not even be enough construction companies to do all the work.
Ah, the real-world limitations.
Even with billions of pounds, you can't just snap your finger.
Nope. Things take time.
Speaking of billions of pounds, let's talk about the elephant in the room.
The money, right.
Privatization involved some serious financial maneuvering.
I bet it did.
They got a debt write-off from the
A
government
clean slate.
and issued a new debenture.
So financially, they were starting fresh.
And of course, they projected some impressive profit growth.
Investors love to hear that.
£83 million in the first year alone.
Wow, not bad at all.
And they even mentioned a progressive dividend policy,
Meaning?
increasing shareholder payouts over time.
So the focus shifts from public service to returns?
Exactly. A clear sign of the changing priorities.
Makes you wonder about the people involved.
The employees.
Their lives are about to change too.
Big time.
So where do we go from here? What happens to the workforce?
Well, that's where things get particularly interesting.
Thousands of people, their jobs tied to Anglian Water.
Right, their livelihoods.
It wasn't just about potential job losses or share schemes, you know.
What do you mean?
It was a cultural shift, the whole company going through an identity change.
From public service to a private company.
Exactly. That changes everything, how decisions are made, how people interact.
A whole new way of thinking.
Did they address this in the prospectus?
They touched on it, emphasizing employee commitment, a skilled workforce.
Trying to reassure everyone, employees and investors.
Like saying, don't worry, we've got this.
But cultural change is messy. You can't just write it into a plan.
Right, people resist, they're uncertain.
It's real lives being affected.
The prospectus gives us one perspective, the company's...
A snapshot in time, a carefully crafted narrative.
To attract those investors.
Exactly, the full story with all its complexities that unfolds over years.
So we've got this internal cultural shift happening, but at the same time...
They've got those environmental challenges we talked about.
Right, juggling a lot.
The prospectus shows a company grappling with its legacy.
The legacy of environmental issues.
While trying to adapt to a new regulatory landscape.
Which wasn't going to be easy or cheap.
Not at all.
You mentioned they weren't meeting all the new water quality standards.
Right, they had a whole laundry list of problems.
Can you remind us what they were?
Nitrates, iron, manganese, even pesticides.
All showing up in their water.
Not exactly what you want in your drinking glass.
And remember, this was 1989.
Things have changed since then.
Environmental awareness was growing, but not like today.
And the technology wasn't as advanced.
They mentioned these Section 20 undertakings
All agreements.
to address specific water quality issues.
Giving them some time to get things in order.
Not immediate penalties.
Right, recognizing that upgrades take time and money.
But didn't they also have relaxations?
Yes, temporary exemptions from some standards.
So even more leeway.
When compliance wasn't practical or too expensive.
Like the government saying, we get it, you can't fix everything overnight.
But those relaxations had time limits.
They still had to show progress.
Don't forget, the NRA was brand new.
Right, they were still figuring things out.
The prospectus even mentions uncertainty about their enforcement approach.
A period of transition for everyone.
Exactly.
Okay, let's focus on one issue, nitrate pollution.
A big one. Still a challenge today.
Nitrates are plant nutrients, aren't they good?
It's about balance. Too much of a good thing can be bad.
How so?
Excess nitrates leach into groundwater, contaminate drinking water.
Ah, I see.
It can cause health problems, especially for infants.
So not just an environmental issue, but a public health one, too.
Exactly.
What was Anglian Water doing about it?
Blending water from different sources, investing in treatment technologies.
Trying to dilute and remove those nitrates?
A multi-pronged approach.
Sounds expensive and complicated.
It was, and still is.
It highlights that water management is a long game.
Decisions today have consequences for years to come.
Okay, we've talked people, environment, but let's not forget the money.
Right, how to pay for all those ambitious plans.
Remember that debt write-off?
A nice little financial boost.
And they also had new borrowing facilities, right?
They mention a £1 billion revolving loan facility.
£1 billion? It's hard to even imagine that kind of money.
It is, but those investments weren't just about profits.
They had to meet regulations, upgrade infrastructure, improve water quality.
Balancing financial sustainability with public service.
Could they actually achieve both?
That was the challenge.
The prospectus does acknowledge risks.
Uncertainty around regulations, potential for unexpected costs.
They even mentioned the capacity of the construction industry.
Whether there were enough companies to do all the work.
It's good that they were being realistic.
A dose of pragmatism.
Now let's talk profits.
The elephant in the room.
How do you justify prioritizing profit in providing an essential service like water?
A central question in the privatization debate.
And the prospectus offers some insight.
They emphasized efficiency, cost containment.
The classic argument, a private company could do it better and cheaper.
Right, but they also acknowledged the need for continued investment.
Not just cutting costs to boost profits.
It was a more nuanced argument.
A vision of sustainable profitability, but with a commitment to public service and the environment.
Exactly.
How realistic was that vision?
Only time would tell.
It's a question still debated today.
But the prospectus gives us a window into their thinking.
Helps us understand the motivations behind privatization, the potential benefits and risks.
And how those issues were being framed back then.
It's a framework for analyzing the long-term consequences.
Which is what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back. It feels like we've been on quite a journey.
We have, through financials, environmental challenges, even the human impact.
Time travelers peeking into a key moment in water management history.
Absolutely.
But why should we care about this today? A British water company going private decades ago.
Well, it's not just an isolated event, you see.
Part of a bigger picture.
A global trend of privatizing essential services, it's still happening.
So we can learn from Anglian Water's experience.
What worked, what didn't, what to watch out for.
One thing that struck me was the importance of transparency.
Right? The prospectus wasn't perfect, but it did offer a lot of detail.
Like shining a light on the process.
For investors to see the risks and rewards, but also for public scrutiny.
Holding companies accountable, making sure it benefits everyone.
Exactly, not just shareholders.
Another key takeaway, strong regulations.
Anglian Water had the new NRA overseeing them.
Shows how important independent regulators are.
To enforce standards, prevent monopolies, price gouging.
Making sure essential services are provided fairly.
And it's not just about having rules, it's enforcing them.
Having the resources, the political will to make it happen.
Absolutely.
So what happened after Anglian Water went public?
Did they deliver? It's complicated, a mixed bag.
They did invest in infrastructure, improve water quality.
But they also faced new challenges: droughts, population growth, stricter regulations.
And they were criticized for higher prices, declining service.
No easy answers, lots of gray areas.
Which is what makes it so fascinating.
Raises questions about the role of government, public versus private interests.
How to manage vital resources.
Questions that are even more relevant today.
With climate change, water scarcity, inequality.
Exactly.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Water is more than just something that comes out of the tap.
It's a precious resource, a public good, a reflection of our values.
How we manage it matters. Who controls it matters.
It impacts everything, our health, environment, economy.
And there are no simple solutions.
Privatization has its pros and cons.
The outcomes depend on so many factors.
What we can do is stay informed, ask questions, engage in these conversations.
How do we want to manage water in our own communities?
Understanding the past helps us navigate the present, shape a sustainable future.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on a deep dive into water and privatization.
It's been a pleasure.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deeper.